Today, we're cracking open one of the oldest, most puzzling, and most irresistible tropes in crime fiction, the locked room mystery, a tantalizing puzzle where the how matters just as much as the who. Hi, my name is Jackie. I'm a mystery author and a mystery reader, and this is part of my series Mystery Trope Talk, where we dissect some popular mystery tropes, their history, and how to write them successfully. Today's video is all about the iconic locked room mystery, and the first thing that we need to do is define what a locked room mystery even is. It's a story where a crime, typically a murder, takes place under seemingly impossible circumstances. The room is locked and nobody could have possibly gotten inside. There's no obvious way that anyone could have entered or left this confined space. And yet, here, in the midst of a place that seemingly no one should have been able to access, somebody is dead. So how is that possible? Typically, in a locked room mystery, a dead body will be found in a locked room by itself, though sometimes there is also one person who is also present at the scene of the crime, and almost always this person is fingered as the culprit, but is actually innocent. They are merely a patsy, and someone else used creative thinking to access the room and frame them. The appeal of the locked room mystery comes from the confounding set of circumstances. The mystery isn't merely who committed the crime, but how it is they did it. The killers in locked room mysteries confound logic, physics, and often common sense. They display unusual and creative thinking in planning their crimes, which makes it all the more satisfying when our detective ultimately determines the truth. Another quick note here, don't confuse a locked room mystery with a closed circle mystery. I often see these terms used interchangeably, but by their truest definitions, they are not the same thing. In a closed circle mystery, the focus is on a limited suspect pool. Usually there will be a group of characters who are all trapped together by circumstance when a murder occurs. Think people being snowed in, on a train, a plane, stuck together on a remote island. I covered closed circle mysteries in a previous episode of this series, so you can find the link in the card. In a locked room mystery, however, the focus is on the seemingly impossible nature of the crime. A closed circle mystery focuses on a small group of suspects who are all trapped together, but in a locked room mystery, it should look like nobody had the access necessary to commit the crime. Part of the fun with a locked room mystery comes from discovering how the killer made what seems impossible actually be possible. The key difference between a closed circle mystery and a locked room mystery is that in a closed circle mystery, very few people had the opportunity to commit the crime, whereas in a locked room mystery, at first glance, it should appear that only one or no people had the opportunity. Locked room mysteries at their surface seem very complicated, though in truth there's only a limited number of solutions you can actually use as a writer. The key is jazzing up those solutions in different ways. So, how do writers pull a good locked room mystery off? Let's go back to some classic solutions. The classic crime writer John Dickson Carr made a name for himself as the master of the locked room mystery. And in his 1935 novel titled The Hollow Man, there is a very famous scene that breaks the fourth wall and became known as the locked room lecture. In this scene, Dickson Carr lays out the potential solutions to a locked room mystery as he sees them. In this famous scene, he proposes 7 possible solutions. They are: number 1, the murder is actually not a murder, but an accident. Number 2, the murderer uses poisonous gas to kill the victim without ever physically entering the room. Number 3, the murderer sets up a trap for the victim, which the victim indirectly triggers after entering the room. Number 4, the victim actually died by suicide, but intended to frame somebody else. Number 5, the killer impersonates the victim to make it look like the murder took place later than it actually did. Number 6, the murderer actually kills the victim outside of the locked room or while the room is unlocked and disguises it. And number 7, the murderer leaves an unconscious victim in the locked room, then actually commits the murder itself when they are discovering the body. These 7 potential solutions lay a good groundwork for writing a locked room mystery. Later writers have also proposed additional potential solutions to locked room mysteries, such as the killer hiding themselves somewhere in the room where they are not noticed, or the presence of secret rooms or passages which the killer is able to use to gain access without anyone knowing. Other authors have also suggested that instead of using something like poisonous gas, they could use another weapon that will later disappear, such as, for example, shooting the victim through the window with a bullet made of ice. It will then melt and not be present when the body is discovered. Though John Dickson Carr's 7 solutions are a good starting point and do cover a lot of bases, you can play with these and use them to create innovative solutions. So, in order to dive deeper into locked room mysteries, let's look at 3 historic examples from famous authors and discuss how they pull off the reveal. In the description, you will find timestamps which contain the names of the 3 short stories we will be discussing today. So if you haven't read one of these and you want to skip that section, you can go ahead and do so. First, let's talk about one of my personal favorite Sherlock Holmes short stories, The Adventure of the Speckled Band by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In this mystery short story, Holmes and Watson are approached by a young woman named Helen Stoner who needs their assistance. Helen and her sister Julia previously lived with their stepfather, Dr. Roylott, at his estate. 2 years prior, Helen's sister Julia was engaged to be married, and shortly before her wedding, she died in her locked bedroom. With her dying breath, she told Helen to, quote, "Beware the speckled band." Dr. Roylott seems like the person who would have the most obvious motive to kill Julia, as if the sisters remain unmarried, he will inherit more money. However, Helen could never figure out how Julia died, as her bedroom was locked from the inside, and it seems impossible for someone to have gained entry. Now, 2 years after Julia's death, Helen herself is also engaged and living in Julia's old bedroom due to construction being done at the house. She is now afraid for her life because she has started hearing a strange whistling noise at night, the same whistling noise that Julia reportedly heard before her demise. Holmes and Watson then travel to the house and decide they will spend a night in Julia's former bedroom. Julia's room has a ventilator inside it, and the ventilator hole connects her room to Dr. Roylott's. While they are staying the night, Holmes and Watson hear the same strange noise, and Holmes ends up beating the ventilator. It turns out that Dr. Roylott was feeding a venomous snake through the vent. This snake was the so-called speckled band that Julia warned Helen about. Because Holmes ended up pissing off the snake, it actually goes back through the ventilator and ends up killing Dr. Roylott instead. If we were going to classify The Adventure of the Speckled Band under one of John Dickson Carr's proposed 7 methods, I think this would fit into category number 6, because Dr. Roylott does not actually have to physically enter the locked room to kill his victim. The ventilator that connects their rooms is not large enough for a person to get through. However, it is large enough for the snake. He is able to feed it through the ventilator from his own room, and then the snake attacked Julia, killing her. Next up, let's talk about The Market Basing Mystery, a Poirot short story by Agatha Christie. Walter Prothero is the reclusive owner of a large mansion, and when he is found dead inside his dilapidated house, it is seemingly suicide. When Prothero is discovered dead, he was shot through the head, and he is still holding the pistol in his right hand. However, the problem is that the shot actually entered behind his left ear. So how could he have shot himself if the gun is in his right hand? Inspector Japp asks Poirot and Hastings to help on this case, and they travel down to Market Basing for a closer look. One very small detail that Poirot notices is that the late Mr. Prothero has a handkerchief hidden in his right sleeve. And though this locked room has several cigarette butts, Poirot notices that the room smells very fresh. There's no stench of smoke. But one would think that with the window closed, smoking several cigarettes in the room would leave a lasting odor. So, how is that possible? A pair of lodgers named Mr. and Mrs. Parker were staying at Prothero's house, and Mr. Parker is soon fingered as the murderer. It turns out that Walter Prothero was not the dead man's real name, and many years ago, while in the Royal Navy, he committed acts of treason. Parker knew the truth about Prothero and was actually blackmailing him with this information. Plus, a local vagrant testifies that he overheard the two men arguing earlier in the day, so it seems fairly cut and dry. Parker must have murdered Prothero. However, this is not the case, and Poirot confronts Prothero's housekeeper, Miss Clegg. What many people did not realize about Walter Prothero is that he was actually left-handed. Poirot deduced this from the handkerchief in his right sleeve. If you were right-handed, you would keep it in your left sleeve so that you could pull it out. But a left-handed person would want it in the right sleeve. Thus, that also means that if Prothero were going to shoot himself, he would hold the gun in his left hand, which would match up with the shot behind his left ear. And Poirot reveals that that is actually what happened. Walter Prothero killed himself. However, Miss Clegg was in love with her boss, and she moved the gun to the other hand to make it look like a murder and not a suicide. Miss Clegg knew that Parker was blackmailing Prothero. When she discovered her boss's dead body, she knew that it was Parker who drove her boss to suicide. Since she loved him dearly, she wanted to make Parker pay for what he had done. By framing Parker, she believed that she was getting justice for Prothero, since she blamed Parker for Prothero killing himself. She changed the pistol to the wrong hand to make the death look suspicious and made sure that all the windows were bolted and locked so that the police would know the potential killer had to be somebody within the house. However, Poirot knew that at some point the window must have been open because otherwise there would have been the lingering smell of cigarette smoke. With so many cigarette butts in the ashtray and the fireplace grate, there was no way the room was going to smell as fresh as it actually did. This story is thus an example of number 4. The victim committed suicide but intended to frame somebody else. However, it has a slight twist because it is not Prothero who was trying to frame somebody else for his murder. It was Miss Clegg, the housekeeper who was in love with him, who, upon discovering her boss's dead body, wanted to make his suicide look like a murder and blame the person who she held responsible for his death. So while this story is an example of that tactic, it has a slight twist by also having Miss Clegg be involved in the deception. And finally, let's talk about the story that many people consider to be the first locked room mystery ever. The Murders in the Rue Morgue by Edgar Allan Poe. In this story, a mother and daughter are found dead in their home on the Rue Morgue, a fictional street in Paris. The murdered women are discovered in a room on the 4th floor, and the room was locked from the inside. So how could a killer have gained entry? And it is true, it would be nearly impossible for a human to gain access to this room on the 4th floor while the door is locked from the inside. But it turns out the killer actually wasn't a mere human. The killer was an orangutan. Yes, I said orangutan. They were killed by a primate. You see, in the story, there is a sailor, and he brought the orangutan back from his travels in Borneo. However, upon bringing the animal back to Paris as a pet, he discovers that he has a very hard time controlling it. The sailor would use a straight razor to shave himself, and one day he discovered the orangutan holding the razor in an attempt to copy his master's mannerisms. After a scuffle between the sailor and the orangutan, the animal escaped, still holding the razor, and ended up on the Rue Morgue. The orangutan was able to climb up to the fourth floor room in a way that a human would struggle to do. It encountered the mother and daughter inside. The orangutan ended up grabbing the mother by the hair and waved the razor around, intending simply to groom her like they had witnessed their master do. Of course, the mother was very freaked out by this, began to carry on and scream, and in a panic, the animal ripped at her hair, slashed her throat, and then also strangled the daughter as well before escaping. And this story all matches up with some orange hair that was previously discovered at the crime scene. This solution to a locked room mystery is interesting. I can't say I've read many mysteries where the killer ended up actually being an animal. I think if we were going to fit it into one of John Dickson Carr's 7 categories, it would technically fit into number 1. The murder is an accident because the orangutan did not have the actual motive to commit murder like a human would. And the orangutan escaping with the straight razor in the first place was also an accident due to unforeseen circumstances. But the other thing about this story is that the murder actually would have been impossible for a human to commit. A human wouldn't have been able to get into that fourth floor room like the orangutan could. So the solution relies on a killer that has inhuman abilities. And while The Murders in the Rue Morgue is undoubtedly an iconic Poe story and very influential even after all of these years, I don't think I would recommend that modern day writers write books where the solution is death by razor wielding orangutan. I mean, let's just be honest, it is kind of ridiculous. So, if you want to write a locked room mystery, what should you do? Ultimately, I think you need to start your writing process by deciding what it is that the killer is going to do. What is your killer's great plan? You can use these 7 strategies as inspiration. Decide which one makes the most sense for the psychology of your killer, and then build the rest of your story around that. And ultimately, it is important to make your solution creative, but also somewhat believable when it is all laid out. It should not be the first most obvious thing that your readers are going to think of, but when it's all laid out in the end, it should make sense. If you liked this episode of Mystery Trope Talk, make sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next episode. Give it a thumbs up, it really helps me know what content is resonating with my viewers. And also let me know in the comment section, what is your favorite locked room mystery? Whether it's a book, a movie, an episode of a television show, let me know. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate our ever-growing community of mystery lovers. And if you want to watch another one of my videos, go check out that previous episode of Mystery Trope Talk on closed circle mysteries. You will find it on the screen right here. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I will see you next time.